How about workload? I mean, how long it's taken you to do these assignments, anything like that?
I think it's pretty fair. Like, I haven't spent that much time on the quiz, but I think I finished it in less than like an hour.
Mm-hmm. For the first one?
Yeah.
Yeah, and the second one is much easier, although actually reading over that little textbook thing and filling out the quiz for that is not really the main thing for week 2. The main thing for week 2 is listening to, media from the left, listening to media from the right, and listening to media from the middle. One thing I'd ask you guys to do, I just added a couple of podcasts that I like to listen to those instructions. But one thing I'd like to ask you guys to do is if you have any ideas for like, hey, check this out, because there's all kinds of crazy stuff happening with news coverage right now from, coming from different angles. And so if you guys want to email me in like, hey, have people check this out if they want like a really, and I don't just mean things you agree with, but like some things that like really, freak you out, like to hear the coverage of like, whoa, like listen to where these people are coming from. Like this is a completely different planet. Like, so if you want to email me any of that, I could kind of, I don't know, create some kind of a post or whatever of like, here's some suggestions your classmates have had for media sources to check out, to get a variety of, perspectives and see how different people are viewing reality right now. How about is there any, well, I'm glad you think so. Can you guys see Mackenzie's comment?
I think that'd be dope as heck.
Yeah, like what do you what are your does anyone have any suggestions? Mackenzie, why are you thinking it's dope? Like, do you have one that you think would be a good source for people to check out? You like listening to podcasts? So I added 2 of my favorite podcasts. I didn't even know where to put them in terms of the left, right, and center, because one was that's okay. One was The Bulwark, which is what are called Never Trumpers. Have you guys heard of the Never Trumpers? So the Never Trumpers are people who are Republicans who broke with the Republican Party because of Trump. And in particular, we're going to say, Luna?
No, I was just saying, okay, yeah, because that's been kind of resurfacing, like, that's just kind of more surfacing lately. Like, I'm seeing, like, a bunch of videos, like, I'm a Republican and I won't vote for Donald Trump this year because so-and-so, or, like, something like that.
Yeah, so they're doing there's a bunch of people out there creating campaign ads and stuff like that to try and pull more Republicans away from Trump that way, peel more off. So the Lincoln Project, have you guys seen any of those ads? All right, wait a minute. Maybe I should, hold on. Let me see if I can find you like an example to share with you guys. This will trip you out. Hold on. There's a bunch of them that are pretty intense. All right, well, this one's pretty quick. Let me start with this one. Hold on, I'll share the screen. This one, the name of the video is Evil.
Oh, God.
And now these are not the Biden campaign. And what's interesting is how different the Biden videos are from these. These are Republicans making videos former Republicans making videos about Trump. And you can see how different than like the way the Democrats would make an ad from these guys.
Evil is real. We ignore it when it seems educated, polite, superficially charming, even sophisticated. We trivialize it, ignore it, and when we do, it grows. On March 31st in the Trump White House, Trump's COVID team, led by Jared Kushner, decided to ignore testing in states with Democratic governors. Evil was in that room. Oh, It looked like any other bureaucratic meeting. There were PowerPoints, spreadsheets, briefings, and estimates of the dead. It was that meeting that led to Trump policies that would kill more Americans than Pearl Harbor, Vietnam, and 9/11. More Americans than World War I. It was deliberate, cold, political, premeditated. Some people say Trump and Kushner were incompetent when it came to COVID, but let's call it what it is.
It is what it is.
Evil.
The Lincoln Project is responsible for the content of this advertising.
So yeah, so that's the Lincoln Project. That gives you kind of a good idea. I mean, I could, they have ones that are, I don't know, maybe harsher than that. Hold on. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend, if you guys seen the one about slow the testing down, we'll do one more. I kind of enjoy these.
The most deceptive, lying president in history finally told the truth. Somehow, it was more shocking than all his deceptions.
When you do testing to that extent, you're going to find more people, you're going to find more cases. So I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
Slow the testing down? Slow down our chance to save tens of thousands of lives. Slow down our understanding of where COVID is and how it's spreading. Slow down the steps to reopen the economy. Every single expert told him to test more and test faster. And now we know his response.
Slow the testing down, please.
That's why this November, more than ever, the choice is clear. It's America or Trump.
So yeah, Democrats didn't make those ads. Hold on, I gotta stop the share so I can see you all again. So anyway, that's the kind of activist part of the Never Trumper thing. But I guess the way I should put it is that a bunch of people who are Republican or conservative intellectuals, you could say, who wrote for magazines and papers, like the Weekly Standard was a major Republican magazine for years. And a lot of these people back in 2016 went Never Trump. And what that made clear is that a lot of the arguments that people at that level of the Republican Party were making about like smaller government or tax cuts or whatever were not actually speaking to the people of the Republican Party. That the voters themselves, the Republican voters themselves, didn't care about a lot of that crap. That like when Trump came along and he started talking about build a wall and whatever, that those people completely abandoned all that side of republicanism. And that left these kind of like Republican intellectuals having to like look in the mirror and go like, what the hell is going on? So that became the Never Trump movement. So there was a billionaire who used to be financing the Weekly Standard, which was their main magazine. And it was a very smart political magazine with conservative voices. And that billionaire shut down the magazine and was not willing to sell the magazine to anyone else, and so fired everybody on the staff right at Christmas of like 2017, 2018. So they got their pink slips, and it was as deliberate, it was like spiteful because they were all anti-Trump and the billionaire was pro-Trump. And so he cut them off, fired them all. So those people got together and they formed a new magazine called The Bulwark. So when I said, I don't know left, right, or center, where I would put the Bulwark podcast, I mean, where do you guys, I ended up adding it to center because, well, it's not left, but it's not right either. Where do you put that? In the center? Like, where's the New York Times anymore? Would you put that left, right, or center? So I put them in the center, because I think they'd like to see themselves as center. But are they the same center as like National Public Radio's, news broadcast or ABC News, which are the things that my colleague Brad had added to that assignment when he put it up? Probably not, because they spend a lot of their time on those podcasts ranting and raving about Donald Trump, which you could argue depends on how you want to define left, right, and center in 2020. I mean, do you have to be pro-Trump to be on the right? Or can you be a never Trumper and be conservative and be on the right? Or are you now on the left because you're anti-Trump? Any ideas? I guess nobody knows, right? So I put them in the center with the caveat that you guys may not agree with that. But you guys may have the same issue. If you found a cool podcast to share, by all means do it. You know, and let's take it from there.
Not necessarily, but I feel like I miss out when it comes to class discussions in a way, says Mackenzie. I like lectures, but I like engaging more.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So Mackenzie, do you feel like we're fulfilling that for you with these Zoom sessions?
Yes. Exclamation mark.
Cool.
So she's passionate about that. Yeah.
The only thing that concerns me about that is, you know, if I can find a better way. Let me see if I can share the. Let's try this. I'm gonna put up one of these PowerPoints, and rather than me blah 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 blah, let's just look at the slides together and see if they're, you know, I'll let you guys pick up on it and see if there are things you want to talk about with it. Does that sound good? So I'll throw up the slides.
Okay.
Some of the stuff on the slides, a lot of it is short video clips, so we can all kind of look at it together. All right, so this, I'm going to start with this one. So what I usually do is the Center for News Literacy is this group out of Stony Brook, and they will give me updated slides, which are riffing off of, it's basically the same course content that we do every semester, but they riff off of news headlines that are in the news right now. And then what I usually do is, you know, being a journalism historian and doing the class the way I want to do it, I feel like they don't cover a lot of the conceptual or historical stuff that I want to get into each week. So a lot of times I'll grab a lot of their news lit slides, and then I'll grab some of my own. And so what I have here is I have one slide deck that's here. Wait, I don't think I shared with you guys yet. Hold on. So, how do I get you guys back here? All right, well, I kind of can't see you all now. I thought I worked this out before, and maybe I did. No, hold on. Oh, sorry, waiting. Give me a second to see if I can do this. All right. Well, anyway, I'm not going to keep messing with it. Somehow here, I figured out yesterday how to do screen share, but now my controls to doing that, I don't see them here. So that's all right. I'll figure it out later. But anyway, this is the news literacy one about the coronavirus. And then this is a lecture I put up from before, which has a bunch of stuff about just the evolution of media. So I'll start with their slides about coronavirus, and we'll take it from there. So Let's see if I can swap screens. Okay, so you guys can see it now, right? I guess I'm gonna have to ask you all, unless I can figure out how to see you, to speak up, because I can't see you right now. So it's full screen for you guys, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll start clicking through these slides, and let you guys kind of maybe hold on. Let me start at the beginning. Let you guys maybe start the conversation off. So this is like just a very preliminary introduction to the course. And they're saying there's all this confusing stuff. Okay, so maybe I should introduce this a little bit. So what they're saying is coronavirus is not the first pandemic, but it's the first to strike while in the midst of a massive upheaval in our information ecosystem. This revolution in communications has created both opportunities and challenges, right? So now this is, you guys have heard me explain this already. This is the idea of from Gutenberg to Zuckerberg. They're saying you're living through the information revolution, the second information revolution in 450 years. Here are two people we choose to represent those revolutions. Gutenberg was an entrepreneur who changed the world by making books easy to make and cheap to buy. He tried to cash in on the growth of the Catholic Church and ironically helped launch the Protestant Reformation, which is what I was saying about how when they invented the press, you can draw a direct line between that and the Protestant Reformation, and I'd argue even to the French Revolution. And then this says Zuckerberg is a techie who changed the world by making self-expression into top social and entertainment activity of 1.1 billion people. He started out just trying to pick up college girls and ironically created one of the greatest fortunes of our time. All of what we have noted so far plays out against this backdrop. It has never been more challenging to be a news consumer because of the, wait, that changed without me changing it. That was interesting. Go ahead. What were you going to say? Was that Luna?
Hmm?
Did somebody speak up?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, it was just because the Mark Zuckerberg picture, how you had it like in the next slide, was just really like wide out. It was fun.
I know, and that's their slide. It's not my fault. They did the crappy slide there. I don't know why they did that.
They knew exactly what they were doing.
Maybe. I mean, let's see what the notes are for it. It says, because of the revolution spawned by these two men, Gutenberg and Zuckerberg, there's more information available to common folks than ever before. So I feel like I probably explained that a little bit clearer to you guys, which is the idea that there was, just as there was a literacy movement with the printed page, there's got to be a literacy movement for reading the digital world, right? That's the simple idea. Now, what they added to what we talked about before was, what does it say here? Many public experts and historians have compared the coronavirus pandemic to the deadly flu pandemic of 100 years ago. That still doesn't explain why they distorted his face. Reflect on all that has changed since then. In 1918, of course, there was no internet, no YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, etc. But that flu even predates television and commercial radio. How did people communicate? Did they occupy their time as public spaces and businesses closed? And then they have these links for that. Why would they? That's a terrible thing. I agree. Have any of you guys read about the pandemic from back then?
Like the influenza and stuff?
Yeah, the 1918 one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So did you guys any insights into? So wait, Mackenzie put something in the chat. Yeah, you've read.
She just said yeah.
Yeah. So do you guys have any insights into, how it was different or, what the story was with the media back then and how that played a role? Has anyone read anything interesting or seen anything about it?
I just remember it was a lot worse than this.
Right. It was. Well, I guess. I mean, I don't know.
Like
We've
people
lost
dying,
108. What?
with like people dying, like just like the pandemic was a lot worse. I don't remember like how the news was. I just remember it was like a bad pandemic.
Yeah, I don't know if. I mean, does anyone know this? We could Google it. Does someone want to Google and tell us how many people died in the 1918 flu pandemic?
I think it was like 50 million or something like that.
No.
Estimated that about 500 million people
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Died?
became infected, but 50 million died.
Yeah.
50 million people died.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was bad.
Yeah. Wait. Mackenzie says the primary difference I noticed was how strongly they enforced laws on making sure everyone took the precautions they needed.
I agree with that.
Were they really strict about that?
Yeah,
And
I agree with that.
And they had pretty good science, like they understood how it spread and stuff.
Honestly, I feel like they really did for like getting everything together and like I don't know, masks and all that. They were pretty smart about it, I think.
So Luke, where did you see stuff about it? Now I'm curious what you guys are reading.
I watched I think it's just called Pandemic on Netflix. I think I watched that and during all this, and then I read a book last year and it went over the 1918 flu pandemic, but not into like extreme detail. But so I haven't like got it from like one major source, just like throughout the years I remember facts about it.
Right. Wow, well that's okay. Has anyone seen that feature film? What is it called? Pandemic or something? Or what's it called? Contagion? Something like that?
Was Contagion on an airplane or something?
There's one that I've seen it on Amazon Prime. It's it's who's in it. It's like it's one of these movies with all the A-list actors like Brad Pitt and stuff like that in it. Have you guys seen that?
World War Z?
No, although that's a good movie.
Are you talking about Matt Damon, Contagion?
Yeah, Contagion. Yeah, have you seen that?
When I was little, a long time ago.
Did it start?
It's weird. I remember it was weird.
Wait, didn't it start in a wet market also?
I think so.
Yeah, I've heard it's good.
Bad.
I've heard it's a good movie.
I went to the class.
Oh wait. Okay, I can see you guys now. Thank God. Okay, that makes it a lot easier. All right. So yeah, anyway, I mean, they were just pointing out that that there were challenges then and challenges now. I guess that was how I was trying to relate the two. Hold on. I finally had you guys shared and now okay, there you go. All right, so this is still full screen, right? You guys are still seeing a full screen of the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And now I have you guys up, so everything's working.
Yes.
Okay, so this was this was kind of an important addition to what we've already discussed, because to some degree we already discussed this, right? And we've talked a bit about, even before today, we talked a bit about the flu and everything, or the pandemic. But here's a good summary of changes that have resulted, in addition to what we've talked about with the gatekeepers about the digital world versus today. So information overload, we didn't really touch on that very much when we talked about it, right? Speed versus accuracy, that we did talk about. You guys remember everybody bringing up, stuff comes out so quick, and we talked about that. I mentioned that old saying that a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put its pants on. Blurring of the lines. Actually, we talked about this. Remember our discussions about entertainment and Trump and reality TV and all that. And
the
so
Kardashians.
What?
And the Kardashians.
Yeah, the Kardashians. And so as much as those lines were blurred before, arguably the digital media experience has blurred them even more. and it's blurring the lines between social media and mass media, right? Interpersonal media and mass media. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, you know, back when, before, did anyone ever have a MySpace account, or are you guys all too young for that? So, you know, back in the days of MySpace or whatever, when, you know, if you wanted to have interpersonal conversation, maybe you texted, but probably you talked on the phone or you talked in person. If you wanted mass comm, that was what TV, radio, and everything else was for. Now, with the you know, predominance of social media, the blurring is going on between interpersonal and mass communication completely, which is a really interesting phenomenon, right? And changes things in ways that I don't know that we've really begun to understand. And then, how about this one? Overcoming our own bias. How does that relate to the digital realm, you guys? I think Noe's trying to, Noe just disappeared on us. See if she can get back on.
Mackenzie said, in order to learn, you need to listen, that's pretty evergreen.
Right. Is Noe back? I think she's back. Noe? She should be. I'm going to probably take
There
her.
she is.
I'm not seeing her yet. All right, Noe, were you trying to say something?
Sorry, Dr. G, I can't really hear you. Oh no, I'm like lagging out really badly.
Yeah, so turn off your video and you should be okay. Just do audio. All right, were you going to say something about bias?
Oh wait, so sorry, what was the question?
Do you think how has the internet realm possibly exacerbated the issue of our biases and the difficulty of seeing beyond your own bias?
I think with the internet, it's very easy to share your opinion with other people, and I guess you can kind of pull sources from anywhere to support your opinion, to make your argument valid, but it's kind of like I don't know, like you can make anything sound right if you have the right sources backing you up. So it's kind of easy to be biased about certain topics if you have like the right amount of things backing you up, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to share with you guys a reading for the first week called Googling is Believing, which was kind of just about that. It was like, you know, and it was playing off of what we were talking about with the informed republic and everything, which is the idea that the news is, and the public sphere, the idea the news is supposed to inform and engage the public. But now if you want to make any argument, you can just Google the point you're trying to make, and you can probably find information to use as ammunition to make your point, right? What about the rest of you guys? Any other ideas of how the internet has exacerbated bias?
I feel like in the internet, like now more than ever, it's easier to get kind of stuck, maybe is the wrong word, but you get comfortable in your own like niche, and you just kind of start making insular decisions, and you'll listen to only people with your own bias. So it's hard to go back and forth. Like there's more options too, but that means there's more options of your own side too. So you kind of become used to just hearing your own opinion.
You guys agree, disagree, want to add to that? Any of you guys heard the expression filter bubble?
Nope.
No.
What do you think it means?
Seems like a pretty straightforward definition. It just kind of like filters out whatever could like harm its chance of like getting noticed or like being credible to people.
Well, like I think what the idea is that when you create a filter bubble, like maybe we all live in filter bubbles, but we've set up our preferences and also the algorithms between Google and Facebook or whatever learn our, like with AI and everything else, their algorithms, they learn our ideological slant. And so they keep feeding us in the direction of like what we already believe to reinforce what we already believe. Plus, like, I'm going to defriend any Trumper who's on my Facebook feed, right? You know, so, you know, I create this filtered out environment where I only get the information that I filter in, and I exist in this reality. Like, I can exist because of the digital world, even probably without knowing it, or unless I stop myself, I can create a reality entirely of my own making by, like, according to my own check boxes and who I choose to communicate with, etc. Do you guys agree that that's a phenomenon? Do you all feel like you're subject to that? Do you feel like you exist in filter bubbles on the internet, like in terms of your online life?
Like, do you mean like we only stick to what we usually watch, sort of like our comfort zone?
I mean, you only take in, like, you're only exposed to information, and you only communicate with people who you already agree with. Like, you're not being constantly, like, in your online life, you're not being constantly exposed to opposing points of view.
Well, I think the internet already kind of does that for us by setting up like algorithms, like on like YouTube or Google or stuff like that. So
Yeah, Luna, that's the point. That's the argument about a filter.
yeah.
So that we exist now within a technology that walls us into our ideological space.
I think some people would argue that that's a major like benefit of the internet, is that, like, obviously it's the whole point of what we're talking about is that you're supposed to be challenged, but people take comfort in not having to listen to people they disagree with, which is obviously why the design. Yeah.
You know, I only have so much tolerance for some of the stuff that I find really disgusting that's out there, right? But on the other hand, I feel that way. How many of you guys admit that you feel that way too? You like what you like, right?
Yeah, unabashedly so. That's I don't feel shame in that.
Yeah, right. And so on the other hand, though, we step back and we look at, you know, the way we began this class with the idea of the public sphere, and you can't have both, can you? You can't have a true public sphere and have what we have with that. Those two things are not compatible. Am I wrong?
I mean, there's certain parts of the internet that people just go out of their way to listen to opinions that kind of like contradict with their own. So I don't know. There's like specific places on the internet where people just dedicate themselves. They just dedicate themselves to arguing with each other. So I think some places they exist, but it's not like very widespread, maybe.
Well, yeah, I mean, but that's got to be a real challenge for a society that wants to be a democracy, right? You know, I mean, if we were, let's say we were talking to these original architects of the Constitution, and we said, well, there is a space in our world where people can actually do what it is you think makes a democracy possible, if they want to go to that chat room or whatever, or that website. But most of us, I mean, I think they wouldn't be very reassured by that, right? You know, do you understand what I'm saying, Neo? Noe?
Yeah, like physically, I don't think people would want to have like really, I guess, controversial discussions in person, because it usually gets out of hand. I can see that.
Well, it's just uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, that too.
What'd you say?
Like, he said, because it might be uncomfortable.
Okay, but I mean, you know, back in 1776 or whatever, they couldn't get on the phone with each other, right? They couldn't get onto telegraphs either. They had to talk about it face to face.
Well, yeah, so that's the point. Like nowadays, that's something that would be like very uncomfortable for a lot of different people.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think we all have like some sort of like problem, like, you know, fully interacting with somebody. Like majority of the time you're doing it like through a screen or like over the internet. So it just like adds an extra block, like in creating or like updating. I don't know.
Right, and I think, Luke, you're onto another really important point, which is that we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about that a man I'm publishing an article this fall about named Walter Lippmann. All right, Walter Lippmann wrote, you know, some of his iconic books about journalism in like 1920, and what he was reacting to, in addition to things like the 1918 pandemic, was he was reacting to the advent of what in 1920? What was brand new in his world, just like what we're talking about is brand new in our world.
Wait, sorry, could you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, so we're talking about the world of the internet, the digital world, right?
Oh.
What was he talking about in 1920?
The newspaper? Wait,
That was one of the things. Well,
no,
what was
wait.
different about the news? I mean, they had a newspaper in 1800, right? So in 1920, 120 years later, what was different with the news?
There was more than one.
More than one newspaper?
I mean, was it the 20s where there was like a bunch of rival newspapers in New York, or am I thinking of later in the century?
Well, there were tons of rival newspapers in 1776 or 1800 too.
Okay, yeah.
But what there was by 1920 was the birth of mass media. Okay, so what do I mean by that? And then this is getting into kind of the subject of this chapter that I'm having you read this week, which is this history of media, like a thumbnail history of media, okay? So what was new in media, technologically speaking, by, say, 1920? What do you guys think might have been new? Is it unfair for me to ask you what was new about newspapers?
No, just a little bit.
Yeah, so newspapers went from a steam-powered press in 1830. Okay, 1830. So 1776, we got Jefferson, Washington. 1830, so that's what, 60 years later? You go from a hand-cranked press, so that I'm like chunk in order to make every page of every paper, right? To a steam-powered press that could produce maybe tops like 30,000 copies of a newspaper, right? To by the time you get to 1900, you have presses that can publish hundreds of thousands of copies of it, right? That leads to the birth of the advertising, newspaper, like advertising in newspapers, which creates a whole new business model, which opens up, first of all, it changes the nature of consumership in America, but it opens up a huge amount of money for news and the news industry, right? That now you can produce hundreds of thousands of copies of a paper, and every one of those papers will have an ad in it, or lots of ads, right? And so now the paper is financing itself through advertising. So that's all new. So this is happening by, say, 1890s, 1900. What other technologies other than, so in other words, you've gone from, say, in the mid-19th century, a really top-selling newspaper may sell 30, 40, 50,000 copies, to by 1900, you have newspapers that sell 100,000 copies, 200,000 copies, millions of copies. You start getting into millions with newspapers and with magazines, and you start having affordable full-color magazines, again with ads. So this is all new by 1900, 1920. What other media technologies are new by 1920?
Mackenzie said the radio.
Yep. So radio. So by 1920, you're having the birth of commercial radio. During the teens There was what they called the wireless, which was radio, but the military had control over it. You couldn't just broadcast from everywhere. By 1920, you started to have people broadcasting with these handmade sets or with, you know, these sets that you would buy to broadcast all over the place. So you might own a laundromat with your family, and in the back room, you have a transmitter and you're your own radio station, okay? So all these mom and pops and all these people are suddenly broadcasting all over the radio. Over that 10-year period, you have the birth of commercial radio. So you have the birth of advertising on radio during the 1920s, because they changed the law. So now everybody could start to broadcast because the war was over. So the military was no longer, like World War I was over. So then the military was no longer dominating the radio and they were letting the public do it. But you didn't quite have a radio industry yet. So by 1930, the FCC, you know, basically the beginnings of the FCC, the government steps in and says, okay, there's only so much room on the radio dial, so somebody has to play referee here, right? Somebody has to make sure that the radio dial is shared by the public. So we're going to step in and we're going to designate certain places on the spectrum of the radio dial to these radio stations. And they have to meet certain standards or whatever, and we have to allow them on the radio dial. So the 20s are really the birth of of radio, right? And by the 30s, you have the golden age of radio. Every family has a radio in their homes or whatever. What other technologies by 1920 are coming online for media?
Television?
Not until 1940s. You know, you have your first preliminary TV broadcasts in the 30s, and in the early 40s, you start really having it in homes by the late 40s, 47, 48, 49. By 1950, that's the thing about the 50s, right? Every home has a TV set in it. Think about it, what other media could there be? You guys are so used to streaming. Movies, right? Movie theaters, silent movies. You have that by the 1890s, 1900, 1910. So between 1900 and 1910, you guys ever heard of Nickelodeons? Where you go in and you drop a nickel in the machine and you whir it, you look through. That's why it's called a Nickelodeon, because you drop in a nickel and you watch a movie through the viewer. So you started having Nickelodeons. The MK Ultra experiment. I don't know, what is that?
I feel like MK Ultra was way later, right? Am I thinking of a different? There's a lot of different government testing things throughout history, but
I don't know. I have to Google that, Mackenzie. I'm not sure. But, you know, as far as you guys see what I'm getting at, by 1920, what Lippmann was responding to was you got radio for the first time. You've got now newspapers publishing not in the tens of thousands, but in the hundreds of thousands or millions. And you've got Hollywood, you know, so Hollywood starts to happen by 1912, and silent movies. So that's when people first come out to Hollywood, say, hey, it's warm out here. We can shoot film all year long. Hey, let's set up a movie studio. So by 1920, there's this movie industry called Hollywood, right? Producing. Now they don't have sound. Does anyone know when sound films are invented? When the first sound film is from? So that's 1927. The Jazz Singer is the first the first sound movie. So you have silent movies, though. You have a Hollywood movie industry. You have movie stars by 1920, right? You have silent films. You have movie theaters all over the country. So what do you have? You have millions of papers coming out. You have radio being born. You have movies being born. What do we call all this? Mass media. Okay, so we have the birth night. So Walter Lippmann's writing, we have the birth of mass media. Okay, so just like we have in the 1980s, 1990s, the birth of the internet. It's really the 90s, right? When you have the birth of the internet, and you don't have broadband until 2000, 2001, 2002. In 1920, you're seeing the birth of mass media. So this is all me following up on it was either Luke or Luna. I think it was Luke that was making the point about things were different in 1776, right? But so when we talk about democracy, and we were talking about, if you guys remember, talking face to face versus something different. So when we talk about how radically our concepts of arguing and debate and confronting each other have changed, you see where a guy named Walter Lippmann would come about in 1920 and be making some of the same points and having the same conversations I'm having with you guys right now, right? Saying, wow, how is this new world that we're in, how is this changing everything? Any thoughts about that? Could you imagine somebody like Lippmann in 1920s arguing, because things have changed so radically, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and Madison's, all their concepts are obsolete because of this technology we have now called mass media? Could you see somebody making that argument? Does that seem bizarre?
I mean, there is something to be said about how, like, the government started using mass media for things in the following decades, with like how much propaganda there was in movies in the 40s, like pro-war stuff. So I guess you could make the argument that that kind of started to push media out of the hands of the people, at least marginally. But also, I wouldn't go so far as to say that was the only factor. I think. Well, I guess.
You're onto something there, Noah, because you know what Walter Lippmann's job was he got hired by the government during World War I. You know what his job was for the government during World War I?
No.
Propaganda. So he became like part of I'm trying to remember what it was. It was the military intelligence branch, because there was a larger branch, and there ended up being kind of a rivalry between the two with I think it was John Creel, who was the head of the major American propaganda arm, had much more power than Lippmann's outfit, which was frustrating to Lippmann, because Lippmann wanted beneficial or benevolent propaganda. He wanted to actually use propaganda to inform people. And that was not the objective of John Creel's group at all. But World War I was really the birth of state-organized, state-coordinated propaganda. And can you guys, picking up on Noah's point, can you guys see why World War I was such a turning point, such an important moment for the birth of propaganda as we know it in the modern world? Because all these technologies were brand new, right? If you remember what I was saying a minute ago, there was technology of movies, right? There was the technology of radio. It's just a lot of that hadn't disseminated to the public yet, but the military had it. And so imagine when things like radio were born into the world. Can you imagine how mind-blowing things like this were? Have any of you guys ever heard the story that like one of the first film exhibitions in France, in Paris, in the 1890s, they sat down a group of people to show them the first time anybody had ever seen a movie. And one of the first movies showed a train coming down the tracks towards the camera. And people jumped out of their seats because they thought the train was going to come right out of the screen and run them over. So, people, when this was born into the world, people had no idea how powerful. This is what we call in the whole study of media effects. Does that seem crazy to you guys?
Like the fact that people believed what was on the screen was real and they didn't question it?
Well, the fact that they would jump out of their streets because they thought the train was going to come out of the screen. Because the media was that powerful to them, the effect.
Yeah, I feel like that's a natural response, given it was the first, movie ever. They didn't know what was gonna happen.
they probably didn't even know what the word movie meant back then. Like so it was like all like new to them. So like for all they knew, they were probably just sitting like in a building, and then they were looking outside at like a window or something. So it's probably like it was all like it was new for everyone back then, except those that had like the military who had more of a need for that and that kind of stuff. So it was just kind of like it's just something new for like the general public.
But we're like more sophisticated, right? Like we would never think the
Well,
media, like new technologies could be that powerful, right?
well, yeah. But like I'm just saying, like in terms of that scenario that you just asked, like.
But like we know, for example, that actually disinformation on the internet is actually causing riots on the streets, right? You guys see what I'm getting at here? We're in the same boat as them. We have new technology, and we have no idea we have no idea yet how powerful it is.
I guess what's kind of unfathomable to me is like, because the period you're talking about is like right at this, like the very start of when film was being introduced as a medium, and at least for me, I can't fathom that someone would look at that the second it's being made and like, how can I use this to manipulate and abuse people? Where like we currently are in decade 3 of having the internet, or we've had it for longer than people then did, and that I guess you could kind of.
Really, I mean, if you had the first film exhibition in like 1891, 1892, World War I erupts in 1914, you've got almost the same lag period of years, right? And you've got a world war, so you've got to fight to the death among all these major countries, and you've got Hollywood. By the teens, you've got an American film industry cranking out a product, which is the only thing the German public would be able to see in the movie theater. So if you were German, wouldn't you think, damn, we better get on the good foot and develop a film industry? And that is when UFA is born, which is the German Weimar film industry. It's really born, they get it up and running during the war, but it's not really born yet until the war ends. And so what it becomes is, rather than being an engine of war and war propaganda, it becomes one of the greatest film studios artistically that ever existed. UFA produces, have any of you guys ever seen Nosferatu?
Oh yeah, I like that.
I have a couple years ago.
Yeah, so
well, are you talking about the like the first one that came out like all the way back then, or like the kind of newer one?
The first one, right?
Yeah,
oh,
the 1921. Have you seen that?
Yeah,
the Max Schecht one, right?
Have you guys seen Metropolis? The German film Metropolis?
Oh, the like experimental, like really sci-fi utopia-esque one, right?
Yeah. Should I show it, or that would delay things for a minute if I put up you guys want to see a trailer for one of these things? To see what?
Yeah.
Okay. Hold on. I hope I can get this all back once I disassemble my Zoom, but I'm going to pray that I can. So I used to teach this, and so I have somewhere, if I know where we're going to go here with it, I have clips of all these things, because I used to do a whole thing on silent film. Can you guys see the screen?
No.
No?
Wait, yeah.
Can you see it? Can you see the clip? propaganda. You see how this film studio is built on. Okay, were you guys able to see all that?
Mhm.
So is anybody surprised at the quality of it or anything?
Mm,
Wait, when was this made?
Like
27.
1920.
Google Store presents a whole month of daily deals on stuff like this.
Hi, book club. You all look really great.
How do you say limping?
Sorry. So, yeah, who asked when it was made? Was that you, Noe? Did you ask when that was made?
Oh yeah. I think someone answered it 1920.
Yeah,
27.
27.
Mhm.
I don't think it was that late, was it?
Yep. I just Google it.
I'm surprised it was that late. That's late for silent movies. That's like the end of silent film. Although
Yep.
that makes sense. It's a pretty sophisticated silent movie, as you can see. But I mean, they did amazing things with silent movies, right? But anyway, I mean, we were talking about UFA. UFA came out of Germany was trying to develop its own film industry as a weapon to fight back against American and British film during the war. And by the time they got all the, financing and all the personnel in place to create UFA, the war, they were surrendering. The war was over. And the thing is that all of a sudden, immediately, UFA had a new national purpose because as with the end of the war, all the Allied nations boycotted any German-made film. And so the films of UFA had to be so good that they actually overcame the German boycott, which they did. Let me show you guys one more because I can't resist. This is The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. I cannot urge you enough to watch this film. It's like, if you're interested at all in film history, you have to know about this movie. Like it's, and let's just hope I can just immediately pull up a good trailer for it. This was one of the, this was like Lucas Films. yeah, that's the birth of mass media right there, I guess you could say. So yeah, I mean, and I mean, I think I brought this all up to suggest that you know, that with each advent of media and media technology, there have been questions about, does this fundamentally change the way we communicate, and is this going to be the end of democracy? How does democracy survive? How does it change what we understand democracy is? And these issues about that we've been dealing with all week of the public sphere, how we communicate about that and everything, right? So let me pull this stuff back up, because we were I guess we got onto that from overcoming our own bias, right? And I guess just the reason that ends up connecting to, say, Walter Lippmann or whatever is, you know, I guess to put it simply, he was arguing that, like, in 1776, if I had a message, I might have a printing press, right? So I might be able to, if I hand crank it, I might be able to make a few hundred or even possibly a few thousand copies of my newspaper, but that's it, right? If I have a radio, if I have that kind of technology, or if I can make a film, I can be one, you know, business leader, one CEO or one politician, and have a bunch of people working for me, like a handful, and I can put that out to millions of people, and they can't, what can they do, right? If I put out a message to 1 million coast to coast, some radio broadcast, what's the radio listener in Honolulu supposed to say back to my message? So you guys see how that, if you're writing in 1920, how that would fundamentally, you know, that would raise fundamental questions about how the public sphere and democracy is going to work, right? Okay, so let's just do a few more of these slides. So okay, so this is all about these changes that are happening now in our world, though, right? Is, you know, they're saying that there's these 3 different kinds of information that are a problem. Unintentional ones, disinformation, which is intentionally created to for conspiracy theories or rumors, kind of attacking the idea of the truth. And then they're saying that, this is new to me, this slide, malinformation, deliberate publication of private information or personal or corporate rather than public interest, such as revenge porn. So, and then here's the overlap between malinformation, disinformation, misinformation, where you have disinformation, right? Mackenzie, you wrote in, what's that scary to think about? What were you referring to with that? Are you talking about mass media, the power of mass media?
I think she meant it was like people abusing the new advent of TV, like
right.
how people abuse the internet now. I think she's typing though. I don't want to speak for her. Sorry.
Right. What was it? Hold on, let me just look at the notes here. This was, she said, hold on. Sorry, go back a second. Oops. Okay, the notes here say this proliferation of information sources has made it challenging to be a news consumer. 3 problems are at the heart of your work this semester. For starters, can we find the discipline to wait as breaking news story unfolds and competing news outlets respond to the pressure of getting the story out fast, sometimes at the expense of accuracy and context? How do we find the truth when every day information when every day is an information tsunami? New business models have proven there is great profit in producing a form of journalism that abandons standards of neutrality, relying on opinion rather than fact. Now, of course, you guys have heard me challenge the idea that a neutral press is ultimately what we want. But anyway, plus, digital technology makes it possible for anyone to publish worldwide. The result is that a great deal of advertising, publicity, spin, and even propaganda is thrown at you every day, dressed up to look like neutral journalism. How can you tell the difference when people blur the lines on purpose? Finally, and this may be our most important lesson, new research by social scientists and neuroscientists document it is hard for us to hear, see, and remember the truth if it challenges our beliefs. How will you overcome your own bias to learn the truth? So, okay, I would argue there are certain biases, you know, implicit in that, in those notes to that slide. Would you guys, what are the biases there, given what you've heard me arguing so far?
Wait, sorry, the biases in
what I just read you.
Well, isn't that kind of a good critical exercise? Or like they're pointing out that there could be misinformation.
Well, there's an opinion embedded in that about what's good news and bad news, right? Should I go back and reread it? Did you guys miss what I'm saying as a bias right there?
I heard it. I just I was kind of taking it more. I was trying to answer the questions more than picking them apart.
Yeah.
But if you could read them again, that'd probably be helpful.
Okay. Can you guys see it on the screen now?
It's really blurry.
Really small.
Really blurry. Okay.
Small and blurry.
All right. So let me go back to. All right. Well, I'll just read it to you. The proliferation of information has made it challenging to be a news consumer. 3 problems are at the heart of your work this semester. For starters, can we find the discipline to watch it as a breaking news story unfolds and competing news outlets respond to the pressure of getting the story out fast, sometimes at the expense of accuracy and context? So nothing, you see any bias there? I mean, maybe, but I suppose we'd all agree that taking the time to discern the truth is probably a good thing, right? Second, how do we find the truth when every day is an information tsunami? So, okay, the bias there is they believe there's too much information. We're being overwhelmed. Okay.
Well, I think that's why in some news outlets they call it like an ongoing story. So that way, like as each day goes by, like there's more information being let out.
Right.
But it doesn't make it so. Calling it an ongoing story doesn't make it like that's it. That's the whole story. Like it just says like, hey, this is all the information we have so far. We're still going to keep looking into it. And a good example of that is right now with like the pandemic and all that going on. That's a good example of an ongoing story.
Right. And we figured out stuff about masks or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
We call that iterative, right? Like they take a whack at it one day and then the next day is another iteration of the story.
Mm-hmm. And then sometimes they'll like go back to like information where they said like, hey, we said so and so that this happened, but now with more evidence, this is what's going on. And like, as long as they stick true, like as long as they keep like updating information or just correcting themselves, I think that would make it pretty reliable more.
Right. So you guys have heard some of my arguments. Now let's look at this next point they make and tell me if you see any bias here. New business models have proven there is great profit in producing a form of journalism that abandons standards of neutrality, relying on opinion rather than fact. Digital technology makes it possible for anyone to publish worldwide. The result is that a great deal of advertising, publicity, spin, and even propaganda is thrown at you every day dressed up to look like neutral journalism. How can you tell the difference when people blur the lines on purpose? So what does that imply is good and what does that imply is bad?
Putting a lot of faith in like credibility and stuff. They're like, if you're just some random person, like we shouldn't believe you. But if you're like maybe more of an established source, then that's worth more like consideration. Or is it the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be one way to put it. What are they clearly saying is good and what are they clearly saying is bad right there and then? Should I reread it so you guys can hear it again?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you tell me if they're telling you right now what's good journalism and what's bad journalism, okay? New business models have proven there's a great profit in producing a form of journalism that abandons standards of neutrality, relying on opinion rather than fact. Plus, digital technology makes it possible for anyone to publish worldwide. The result is that a great deal of advertising, publicity, spin, and even propaganda is thrown at you every day, dressed up to look like neutral journalism. How can you tell the difference when people blur the lines on purpose?
Okay.
So what does that necessarily follow that is good journalism? Based on what they're saying.
They're saying good journalism is unbiased, but nowadays there's people actively trying to sabotage that and make it seem like everything is not trustworthy.
Yeah, so is that from God's lips to your ears?
No.
Like, how would I maybe push back? You guys have heard my opinions before. How would I, about journalism? How would I maybe push back?
I think maybe just, I think you would have to like look into like the article on the website and themselves, see what they like provide, because like if they give more personal testimony rather than fact, maybe it's not really as reliable.
Yeah, I mean, although, are you following me here, Luna? Like Luke, do you get what I'm getting at here?
Kind of, but also I feel like it's just also like, it's hard to read in between the lines on this one for me.
Well, it's right there though. They're saying there's these forms of journalism out there that abandon the standards of neutrality. Like that's obviously not a good thing, right? So,
yeah.
So what they're saying is good journalism is neutral journalism. Good journalism is unbiased journalism. Is that like from God's lips to your ears?
Well, it's a leg of the practice.
Yeah.
Isn't the whole point to, like, you can have your own opinions and things, but is neutrality not kind of a goal in delivering news?
Well, okay. What I'm getting at is that, I mean, and we'll talk about this more as we go on this semester, but the idea that facts don't just exist just naked as facts, okay? If I say something, I'm trying to think of an example. You know, if I say there were 1,000 protesters on the street or whatever, anything that I say, you understand it because I've when I report it to you, I've created a web of interpretation around it, okay? And as a person, if I'm going to be a journalist, I have a point of view. I may not express that point of view to you outright, but it's probably there in the way I organize the information or the way that I phrase things, right? So it's maybe I don't tell you what my point of view is, but if I'm an individual telling the story, I'm going to tell it to you the way I choose to tell it to you. Okay? And that's true with every story any individual puts up. If you know, I can't tell a story if I don't have a point of view because I'm a human being, and all human beings have a perspective, right? And third, you know, so I would say there are three dimensions when we have facts and present them. There are three things potentially connected with that. One is opinion, right? I'm going to have a point of view about it at the very least. We could call that my opinion. Another is interpretation. I'm not going to be able to communicate with that if I don't, like, you know, if I do a story, I can't just do a list of facts. I have to stitch them together by telling you a story, right? So that story is going to involve a degree of interpretation in order to put the facts together. And third, I have a moral standpoint, right? I'm not going to report all things as if they are equal, or I might, but then I'm taking my morality out of the story, and we could question whether that's always such a good idea. So, so one thing is, do we ever even offer purely neutral reporting? Is that even possible? And second of all, even if it is possible, is it desirable? if I'm the editor, we talked about this the first week and a bit the second week. If I'm the editor of the New York Times and it's 1935, and I send an American correspondent to Berlin and say, tell me what's going on there, and he gets there and he sees this guy named Adolf Hitler and Nazism, what do I want? What kind of journalism do I want back? Do I want something neutral that doesn't involve interpreting what's going on the ground, that doesn't involve a point of view, and that doesn't involve a moral perspective about the rise of Nazism? Is that good journalism? If human beings, if people in New York or in all across America are picking up the New York Times the next morning and they've never heard of Adolf Hitler, and the first they're being told of him is from my correspondent in Berlin, do I want what this slide is telling me is good journalism?
Yeah.
Obviously, you're going to want to include some kind of moral, like, foundation just to kind of explain all the like wrong that he is doing versus just like a very neutral recounting.
Yeah, I mean, what would that even be? How do you tell the rise of Nazism in a purely factual way that involves no opinion, no interpretation, and no morality? What kind of journalism is that?
It's soulless. It's just kind of factual without putting any emphasis.
Like,
is it even possible?
If you're not going like after the facts and getting different opinions, then like people might kind of like brush it off and not take it as seriously as it could be, because you're not adding that kind of morality or that like risk to it, or like that awareness of it. Like for all I know, like probably if like based off what like that reporter is telling me, like it's just like, oh, it's just a bunch of people, like based off like what I would be hearing, like, oh, it's just a bunch of people that like could do something. But like if you go out and get more information, like say if you talk to a couple of supposed Nazis and a couple of regular people, then you could start to understand that like middle ground and see like how dangerous this threat could be.
Well, here's another way of looking at it. Well, yeah, you're getting exactly my point, Luna. Here's another way of looking at it. What do you think is going to be more objective and neutral? Me running around with a camera, or putting a camera up, like a fixed surveillance camera, or letting it rove around, on some kind of automated thing, or tracking movement? What's going to be more objective and neutral?
Surveillance.
I think surveillance, but like,
so is there even any possible version of that if you send a human being onto the streets of Berlin in 1935? I mean, if what we really want is neutral reporting, purely factual reporting, does that even work?
I mean, it could, but there would just like, all you would have to go off of is maybe his word, and maybe if he has like a notepad with him, what he starts to write about. Like if you want to go neutral, like without the camera, I mean, if you still have that camera up there, then all you would have again is just his word and what the person writes down.
It would be kind of incomprehensible or incoherent, though, wouldn't it?
I mean, it would be, but I mean, that's just like at the time, like of 1938, like obviously like people didn't have like cell phones back then, so you couldn't just like have a tiny little camera going around wherever you go. But I think that was just I think that's just a different time period in terms of getting more information and being like reliable. Because like nowadays, like I think now if it was happening right now, people would ask like, hey, did you get like any recordings? Did you take any pictures? And then they'd be like, no, but all I have is my word. Then maybe they'll be a little bit more hesitant. But I think back then it would have been more taken seriously, or been more like reliable, because of the limited access to like different technology that they had.
So you're saying it could be done now, but it couldn't be done then?
No. Okay, so in the exact same scenario, like if you were going to Berlin and you were hearing about this guy Adolf Hitler, like you would keep like your phone like your cell phone in your pocket, and then you would have like your tiny little recording device, and then you would just go around asking. But back then they didn't have cell phones, so it's different and not as much access to that. So all you would have as reliable sources are just his word and surveillance. So I'm saying that it's just because of the different access to the technology that stuff would be more reliable or unreliable.
Okay. What do you? Anybody else have any opinion about this?
I mean, I think I've seen something like that in today's journalism, because there will be examples of just poorly written like headlines or articles where they kind of circumvent what actually happened. And part of that might be intentional. It's less neutral and more of like an avoidance of the event, but it'll be like died as a result of police intervention instead of like killed by a cop. It'll be like deliberately going around. Have you guys seen that on like Twitter and stuff? There will be like headlines that really like
they try to like provoke you.
They
to
completely do the most
way.
to like not explain what happened, and that's probably more of the disinformation because it's intentional than like neutrality. But it's sort of that, because technically they're right. It was a death that was caused by like a cop, but it's done in such a workaround kind of way that should be more like or less neutral. There should be more specific about what happened. Oh, it's Peter Alexander.
So you're saying it should be more or less neutral if they want to get into more detail?
I'm saying it should be more clear about what happened, and because when you write a headline that's so misleading as to kind of obfuscate what happened, you need to be more neutral or less neutral and actually explain what the heck happened. So it's like the Hitler thing where you need to be more specific and go like, this is bad. We need to focus on the bad parts.
Let me give you guys a clip of footage, and you tell me if you think that what we're getting here is objective coverage, and if you think this is the kind of coverage that we need, okay, for neutral coverage. Can you guys see the screen?
Yes.
All right.
The auto industry that's been churning out sleepy sedans. We have a brief announcement to make. Yawnfest
I'll show you
canceled.
two clips. Okay, so this is one.
What do you say the Americans were scared, though? I guess nearly 200 dead, 14,000 who are sick, millions, as you witness, who are scared right now. What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say.
I
think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people. The American people are looking for answers, and they're looking for hope. And you're doing sensationalism, and the same with NBC and Comcast. I don't call it Comcast. I call it Concast. Let me just for whom you work. Let me just tell you something. That's really bad reporting. And you ought to get back to reporting instead of sensationalism. Let's see if it works. It might and it might not. I happen to feel good about it, but who knows? I've been right a lot. Let's see what happens, John.
Can I get back to the science and the logistics? The units.
What a fucking idiot.
Wait. I've never seen that clip before. I can't believe that's real. Oh my god.
I mean,
more like it. There's more like it. Yeah.
Hold on. I mean, this is every day, you guys.
He likes to evade the questions a lot.
No, because like all they wanted was just like, what do you have? Like, what message do you have for people that are worried right now? And then he's just like, that's a terrible question to ask. Why would
attacking the guy?
Here you go. Here's another one.
Oh boy, here we go.
Oh god.
Here we go. How would you rate your ads experience on YouTube so far?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. You said that the pandemic is disappearing, but we lost 6,000 Americans this week. And just in this room, you have dozens of people who are not following the guidelines.
Let me explain something. So he held this press conference in his Bedminster Country Club, and it was a press conference for the White House press corps, but then he invited all of his country club members into the press conference. This was like 2 weeks ago.
Uh-huh.
New Jersey, which say you should not have.
No, they don't have. It's a political activity. You're wrong on that because it's a political activity. They have exceptions, political activity, and it's also a peaceful protest. So when you have, and as you know, they asked if they could be, a number of, and to me they look like they pretty much all have masks on, but you have an exclusion in the law. It says peaceful protest or political activity, right? In fact, specifically, it says exactly political activity or peaceful protest. And you could call it political activity, but I'd call it peaceful protest because they heard you were coming up, and they know the news is fake. They understand it better than anybody. And they asked whether or not they can be here. Like the question about Russia. He doesn't mention Iran was in the report. He doesn't mention, or he mentions very late that China was in the report, because that's the way they are. They're not. If the press in this country were honest, it wasn't corrupt, if it wasn't fake, our country would be so much further ahead. But we're doing really great. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much.
Okay, what was even the question? Because I couldn't hear over all of his supporters and all that.
They said that there are people crowded in, that it was, in terms of the pandemic, it was dangerous, and why aren't these people wearing masks?
Oh, Trump's most heated exchange with reporters. Ooh.
So my question is does that seem like, is that neutral reporting? They got a fixed camera, right? You can't get any more neutral than that. The reporters aren't saying anything but recording. Mm-hmm. Is that what we should expect from the most we should respect from our reporters? Is just to be the camera on the wall.
Wait, you mean?
I mean, that's
okay.
Can you get any more purely objective than the role the press is playing in those clips? The camera's rolling, the reporter asks the question, they sit there. I mean, I guess, what's his name? Peter Alexander or whatever is kind of making faces. Yeah, Peter Alexander. But other than that, it's about as close as I can come to purely objective reporting. Is that what we want from our reporters?
Like in a professional setting, I guess. I guess you can't really report with someone if they're being hostile towards you. So it would make sense to just try to be respectable towards each other. But I don't know. In that instance, I don't know. That wasn't very professional.
Yeah.
I think it was Trump. I don't think it was the reporter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't even anything they were doing wrong.
What are the reporters supposed to do? Are they supposed to? Trump is Trump, so that's who we have as president. That's who they're given to cover. I mean, Adolf Hitler.
Yeah, you can really argue with him.
Well, if I was the New York Times editor sending somebody to Germany, Hitler is Hitler. So what do I tell the reporter to do? Do I tell him to be the fly on the wall, keep the camera going, don't say anything, just record? Okay, so Noah, you got to leave.
Thank you so much.
All right, hope you got something out of the discussion.
I did. Yeah, thanks.
I don't know. Am I asking a fair question in the first place? Because I was about to put this together for an exercise on objectivity, actually.
Yeah, I think it's nothing that the reporters are doing wrong. It's just that how Trump's handling it and being hostile. Like in the last one where he's at his country club, he didn't even answer a question. He just called out the news supposedly that they're being fake and then just walked out. That's usually his go-to tactic, where he doesn't fully answer a question, he goes after the news, and he just leaves.
So do you think the press should keep showing up, keep turning on the film, keep doing what they're doing?
Absolutely. Because otherwise, if you don't do that, and if you don't keep doing that, then you're just going to keep furthering onto his point, and then he's going to make it.
All you guys agree with that? This is the best way to cover Trump?
The news is news doesn't want to come out anymore because they know I'm right and they know that they're wrong, and like he's just gonna find a way to work it back and make it about them. So like he's gonna find a way to like target them, and he's just gonna add fire to the flame and just calling them out on that. But that's why we need to keep having them out and asking the real questions. Like I don't know what his name was, but I think he was Australian that sat down with Trump.
Yeah, Jonathan Swan.
Yeah, something like that. He just kept sitting down. Like he showed him the papers like of the charts of the COVID rate, and then he was just looking at him, and then even like when he kept like denying the question or like just trying to turn away from it, like that reporter kept like finding a way to work it back to it and provide evidence, but he just kept ignoring. And I think that's the kind of reporting that we need more. But I think they're again, for me at least, I think that they're being too professional and cautious to keep trying to add on to it. But at the same time, it's also Trump that he's not answering the question and he's just walking out. So it's more on how Trump is handling it than the news.
Does anyone want to push back on that? Does anyone think it's not the job of the press to gather around and let him ridicule them and insult them and abuse them?
I think it's good that the press captures like these moments of him just trying to evade the questions, because it kind of gives you insight on like how he's dealing with the problem publicly. So it's good that the press is kind of taking a beating for the rest of us.
Exactly.
I mean, just a counter argument, what if I say that a lot of the people watching this are actually his fans? They agree with the people in Bedminster. And what they see is somebody saying, you're a bunch of fools, and the other people nodding their head and standing there. And the natural conclusion that a lot of the public is going to make is, if these people are going to stand there and let him tell them to their faces they're fools and not argue and not say anything else the way any normal person would respond, then they probably are fools. Just to play devil's advocate.
Yeah, and like that's kind of like there's this question that like I heard, like I don't know when, like who's the bigger fool, the fool that leads or the fool that follows? So it's like who's more like who's more of that as a result?
I mean, if you sit there and you allow somebody to personally insult you the way he did to Peter Alexander, is that some kind of professional, you know, I mean, I have a hard time with I was a journalist for 10 years. I have a hard time that the dictates of what my professional, you know, behavior was supposed to be was to allow people to sit there and pelt me with insults, with personal insults. If I got insulted, just out of a personal dignity, I would say, you know what? I don't have to sit here and take this from you, and I would leave. And I would say any profession that would tell me that I'm supposed to take that kind of indignity, there's something wrong with that profession. But that's just me.
I guess it's just, I don't know, like if you are really focused on getting that story and like getting the answers you wanted, I feel like to a certain extent I would just ignore it just to get the information. But
are we getting really
it's
valuable
kind of strange
information
that
from him, or are we just giving him a platform to unload on people?
I guess.
I feel like he gives valuable information in the way that Trump behaves with people and the way that he treats people. And I feel like that allows people to gather their own opinion on what he does. Like, I don't know, watching that, it makes me mad. Like, how are you going to say that this person's stupid for asking a question that's concerning people's safety? You know? Like, I feel like...
and then he finds a way to work it back around and make him seem like, hey, it's not that I'm not doing anything bad that's making the people worried. You're doing something bad to make the people worried.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely a tough, you know, I guess what I would get back to is, I mean, I personally don't think that they should sit there. I think it's damaging to the press because this went on every day for weeks. I mean, I'm giving you guys 1 2-minute clip, but this went on for weeks of hours every day. And they were showing up not because this is for journalistic value, in my view. It was because it was high ratings, because millions of people were watching this and were watching him abuse and bully the press. And there's plenty of evidence of him doing it now. I mean, one more clip of him bullying one more reporter, I don't know that adds a lot of new information to what we already knew. It's just that the Trump show is back on. But I would, you know, I think there's different sides of this, right? Just to get back to the slide, I mean, my point about the slide was, can you guys now see what I'm saying about the bias of the slide? When it says, new business models have proven there's great profit in a form of journalism that abandons standards of neutrality, relying on opinion rather than fact, etc. I mean, I'm just suggesting that it's debatable that good journalism doesn't have a point of view, or that good journalism doesn't take a moral position, right? Mackenzie, you're
muted.
What were you saying?
Still nothing.
You got to turn off your mute. It's still on. I think you did it.
Oh.
Unmute it again.
Oh.
There she is. You got it. Okay.
No, still nothing.
Maybe you should just type it.
Text it, yeah.
Yeah, type it, and then we'll see what she says. The bias is more clear now.
The bias is more clear now everywhere?
In the slide.
Oh yeah, okay, in terms of what I was talking about, right? You know, I guess I should say, you know, my own point of view doesn't end there. It's not that I think, you know, personally, and this is just my current view of where things are with journalism and where they should go, and I'm not arguing that you guys should agree with me. I'm just trying to articulate my point of view. And that's that, you know, personally, I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't think we should abandon the concept of objectivity altogether. What I do think we should do is we should acknowledge that facts have to be interwoven with a point of view, with interpretation, and with moral positions. And that we have to be, like, a journalist can, let's say you had a byline, okay, here are my stories, and you could click on my byline to see, here's where I'm coming from. That's what this Professor Jay Rosen suggested. It wouldn't, if on the moral side of things, it wouldn't be like, oh, I'm gonna put up the 10 commandments. What I would put up is my positions on what we would call emerging ethics, which are ethics that are currently in contention, that are currently being sorted out, okay? So like in the 1850s, 1860s, the country was fighting over slavery. And for the first time, we were accepting a new norm, which is that slavery was wrong and that it needed to be abolished, okay? In the 1930s and 40s, because of the rise of Nazism, we embraced a new ethical imperative, which was human rights, okay? In our own time, maybe the new ethical imperative is animal rights, or, you know, maybe it has to do with the social justice stuff that we're reckoning with right now. But my argument would be that you know, there would be an objectivity that acknowledged our point of view, our interpretations, and our moral positions, but that it could still be objective in the sense that I don't just write I don't just throw things at the wall. If I'm going to report, I gather facts, I acknowledge my own point of view on that, and then I challenge myself before I publish. I subject myself to self-scrutiny. So that's where a lot of the objectivity comes in, right? I am self-conscious about what I publish, and I try to be skeptical, and I try not to not to just serve my whatever point of view I have or whatever interpretation I had coming in, but the truth. Might that be like a new way that we understand objectivity, that doesn't use terms like neutral or impartial or unbiased, because we're acknowledging, you know, that we have some of those things. And by the way, and I don't know how we would do this with platforms like Facebook or YouTube or whatever, but do they need, they're publishers of news and information, right? So do they have a certain responsibility to subject themselves to their own kind of editing before they just allow, you know, massive amounts of content onto the internet like that?
Like filtering out certain opinions?
Yeah, and certain information in the way that it's presented. I mean, Facebook just announced today that they are going to be blocking all political advertising the week before the election, right? Trump said yesterday, vote twice. He told his voters, vote twice. Vote by mail and then vote at the voting booth. Did you guys hear this?
Can you even do that?
No, it's illegal.
No, yeah.
So he told them to do it. So Facebook took it down. So to your point, Noah, yes, I'm saying they're going to need to, they had to do that to the president in the last 24 hours. So it's happening. It's just a question of what standards you set for how it happens.
Didn't Twitter like restrict, I think it was, I don't remember who it was. It was like, I think it was one of his kids, like Twitter accounts or something like that. Or like, I know something happened within like the administration.
Well,
that like Twitter had to, like,
you know,
restrict
they're being dragged more and more and more into the role inevitably of editor, right? Like they've also had to take down all these malicious sites where people have gone on Facebook groups and said, hey, show up over here in Kenosha, Wisconsin with all the guns and ammunition you have.
Oh my gosh.
You know, so whether they like it or not, they are editors. They're not just algorithms or platforms. But the question is, if they're going to be put into that role, do we really have clear enough standards for understanding what that role is? We've got Walter Lippmann era's ideas of objectivity. Walter Lippmann, by the way, we keep talking about him because, you know, people called him, the reason why I published this article is because people called him, ever since 1920, the most wise and forceful champion of objectivity, meaning what we used to know, neutral, unbiased, detached. Although I don't think he would, at the end of the day, I think he would argue that's an oversimplification of the things he himself was saying. But we've had 100 years since then, right? And so the question is there a way for us to rethink objectivity, not just for the journalists, you know, the guys in that room we were looking at in the YouTube video, but for YouTube and for Facebook and Twitter and all that. I'm sorry, this was supposed to be my introductory slides. We're into like October or November of the semester with it. This is when we get into this stuff more. But I mean, you guys are the kids who are jumping ahead, so I, you know, I kind of got ahead of myself. I should have stayed neutral and objective today. But should I keep going? I mean, it's 3:50 now.
I have to go at 4, so just so you know.
All right, so a few more slides and let's call it a day. I mean, what I would do, oh, so look, we're almost at the end of them. So what is this slide? But, you know, my second slide deck from today, and maybe I can, if you guys, are you guys willing to maybe do this with me with these slides? Because these slides get into stuff like the history of media. Although that's pretty much it, I guess. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, oddly, I can't even believe it. We pretty much covered, the slides today, even with all the talk. I guess that's because we've had such a long Zoom conversation. But yeah, I think we covered everything. Wow, I don't even believe it.
Go us.
What do you guys? I mean, the one thing that we didn't really cover that I would have covered is the stuff that's in the need for news. And we talked a lot about how media evolved. And I guess the final thing I would really convey to you guys is, so we had the pre-written era of media when everything was oral communication, which you guys would read about in like that Need for News reading that I gave you, which is all about tribes and how people used to communicate before there was a written language. And then there's Gutenberg and the idea that print itself was a media revolution. And we talked a lot today, actually, about the invention of the steam press and the printing press, you know, the way that we then developed into a mass production machine with print production. So that was the era of print and industrial stuff, everything from Gutenberg in 1440 to the millions of newspapers that you could produce with a printing press by 1900. So that whole 500-year evolution, that's the era of, say, print. And then the next era of media evolution is what we could call the electronic era, which is, you know, what we were talking about with movies, radio, television, everything from the telegraph through to the invention of the computer, okay? And then finally, we have the digital era. So those are the you know, that would be my other major point in the opening lecture, is just be aware that there are these major evolutions in media. And finally, that every single, we've talked about this already, but every single one of these media doesn't stop evolving, right? Like, it's not as if print stopped evolving with the invention of those printing presses that allowed you to create hundreds or millions of copies, right? Because what were we talking about the ways just in the last few years that print has continued to evolve? Hyperlinking, texting on your phone, right? Your Kindle, you know, whatever the next iteration of digital paper will be. These
If
so
there's even paper.
What?
If there's even paper anymore, now it could just be like on your hand or something like that.
Yeah, like projecting onto the table, whatever, you know. So print, even print, as old as it is, continues to evolve. Did television stop evolving, like after the 50s?
No, it kept going.
Yeah,
Got bigger.
think about how much television has changed in just the last 20 or 30 years. You know, when I was a little kid, there wasn't cable television. There was just the 3 networks. Then there was cable TV. Then there were what we used to call flat screens. Do you guys even call them flat screens anymore? Or plasma televisions? We call them flat screens now. We used to call them plasma televisions, the 50-inch, this thick. I mean, you think we had that in the 80s and 90s? We had televisions that were 50 or 60 inches big. Like, I got my living room now with like 4K definition so that it looks as good as a goddamn movie theater in my living room right now. We have, you know, do you think there was streaming 10, 15 years ago, on-demand video? The whole evolution of, are any of you guys big fans of the whole evolution of what we call the golden age of television? Like, ever since The Sopranos, we've had Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, all the you know, shows on Netflix like Narcos and all that kind of thing. So, you know, that's arguably become more the center of entertainment than movies. People go less and less to the movies now and watch these kind of film quality TV shows like Game of Thrones, right? Multi-million-dollar. I mean, you know, in the 90s, we didn't have TV shows like that. You know, we had like, I don't know, like
I think the closest thing the first time that was like the closest thing that came to something like that was like around like the 90s when there was like Seinfeld or like Law and Order or something like that. I think that was the closest thing to where like it was like mainstream TV that was like popular. I think that was like the closest thing to it.
Right, yeah, we had like Seinfeld and Law and Order. We didn't have shows like Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad or Narcos or whatever. So I mean, and it's not just that the tech has evolved, right? Where I might watch the TV on my computer now, or I've got these amazing TV screens now in my living room. It's also the actual art has continued to evolve, right? So that would be my final point, just as the introductory lecture about, hey, here's a little bit of history of media, right? Okay, so I will see you guys Tuesday. I don't know what the hell I'm going to be doing Tuesday. I got to come up with some kind of a plan. Any ideas? Anything you guys want me to see me take on?
No, actually, but I had a question really quick. So, well, this is just for I think me at least regarding the presentations on the 8th.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I was a little confused by what you said towards the end because you were saying something about like you'll add discussion questions for me, like something like that. Because I think I put Anchorman for the movie I was watching, but should I do the project on Bombshell then?
No, you should do Anchorman. I was just saying you can put up a question, but they'll be required to watch the other movie. They're not required to watch Anchorman.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The rest of the class.
All right. So should I still? Okay, so Bombshell is the whole like required, but Anchorman is just like personal.
I mean, you should do everything for the presentation assignment that the Bombshell people should do it. But for the rest of the class, they're required to answer. They're required to watch Bombshell. They're not required to watch Anchorman. So, because that movie's dumb. No, I'm just kidding. Are you psyched to see it?
Well, yeah, because that takes place in San Diego, and that's my hometown. So.
All right. And it's another. If you haven't noticed, you will notice by next week or by the next movie, we're dealing with a little bit of a battle of the sexes issue here. So one thing we can talk about Bombshell maybe on Tuesday, or definitely we can talk about Bombshell. Another thing we can do is we can talk about, if you guys have done the homework yet by then, we can talk about your experience of left, right, and center. So that would be a good thing to have ready if we want to have a robust discussion, right? That's something you guys can bring to the table. So, okay. I'll see you guys on the interwebs pretty soon. No final questions, right? Any questions? No? All right, another great session. I'm enjoying these. This is more fun than class. I like this.
Oh, better.
Yeah.
Better than.
All right. I'll see you guys next week.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. G.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.